Welcome back. In the final step, we are going to take our trial balance that we created in the last video, and we are going to use the numbers and accounts to create our three basic financial statements. We're going to do them in a very specific order. We're going to start with the income statement because we will use information from that to create the statement of retained earnings. And then we'll use information from the statement of retained earnings to create the balance sheet. So the order is important because of that. The first is the income statement. The income statement is revenue minus expenses. That gives us our net income. So let's start by entering revenue. And I'm going to pull this right off of my trial balance. So I don't need to go back to my journal entries or my T accounts. I've got this nice consolidated trial balance. And my revenue is $120,000. Then I'm going to subtract my expenses. So first I have payroll expense. And the reason that we gave a separate numbering series to revenues and expenses is because these two are going to go on our income statement. And so we want to be able to keep them separate from the other equity accounts. So payroll expense was $10,000. And rent expense was $5,000. I'm listing everything here as a positive number, and then my formula knows to take revenue and subtract the expenses. And then finally, depreciation expense was $2,000. Okay, so I have a formula here, and it basically says take revenue and subtract the expenses. So it's okay that I've listed them all as positive numbers because that's how we do the income statement. And then I'm going to label this net income. So my net income is $103,000. Now I know. The next statement I am going to do is my statement of retained earnings. The statement of retained earnings is a roll forward statement. And there's going to be a separate video where we talk about roll forwards, but this will be our first one. So we start with our beginning balance. In this case, beginning retained earnings. Now, this is the first month of our company has ever existed, and I'm telling you that, that's how you know that. And so we have 0 as our beginning retained earnings. As we go into future months, we'll roll forward retained earnings, and we'll do that in a later module. Then we are going to add net income. And our net income, we know from looking up here, is $103,000. Then we're going to subtract dividends. And I go over to my trial balance and I see that our dividends are $10,300. This time I am going to say minus. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense. It's just how the statements are presented. So we list everything as a positive number in the income statement. In the statement of retained earnings, positive numbers are positive, and then the dividends, which we're subtracting, are negative. So our ending retained earning, let me add that, ending retained earnings. Okay, so our ending retained earnings are $92,700. All right, we're going to use that number in a minute. Now we're going to go to our balance sheet. And our balance sheet is the statement that basically is based on our accounting equation. Assets equal liabilities plus equity. Okay, so we're going to start with our assets. And we're just going to go in order on our trial balance. So our first asset is cash. And we're going to list that as $152,700. Then we go to accounts receivable. Again, I'm just following my trial balance, $70,000. And then inventory Just listing my assets, 5,000, and equipment, which was 72,000. And then I'm going to put my accumulated depreciation because my accumulated depreciation is an asset. We can tell by the account number I've given it, and also because it was on our transaction log listed under assets. But it has a credit balance, which means it's decreasing assets. So I'm going to write down here less accumulated depreciation, and I'm going to list this number as a negative because it's a credit balance sitting in the asset section of the balance sheet. Then I'm going to type in total assets. I already had a formula in here that added them up. My total assets are $297,700. Okay, let's go to our liabilities. We're going to do our liabilities. We have one liability account, accounts payable. And the balance in accounts payable is 5,000. I'm going to list this as a positive number because I'm in the liabilities section. Liabilities have a natural credit balance. So because 5,000 is in the credit column, it's a positive number when represented in the liabilities section of the balance sheet. Total liabilities. Am I spelling this right? I think so. Okay, so those are my total liabilities, $5,000. Now I'm going to list my equity. And my equity is going to, I'm going to start with stock, which is my first equity account. All right, my other equity accounts are going to be dividends, revenue, and expenses. But I'm not going to list those all out separately on my balance sheet because my revenue and expenses are already part of net income. And net income and dividends are already part of retained earnings. Let me show that again. So my revenue minus expenses gave me net income. My net income and my dividends are in my retained earnings. So when I get to my balance sheet, I'll list stock and then I will just list retained earnings, which is the accumulation of my revenue, my expenses, and my dividends. And my retained earnings I saw from up above was $92,700. Okay, so that gives me total equity of $292,700, and it gives me total liabilities plus equity of $297,700. Now let's go back to our accounting equation. It says assets must equal liabilities plus equity. My total assets are $297,700. My total liabilities plus equity is $297,700. So they equal. That means I must have done something right. So I'm going to give it a double underline to show I've checked my work. When you get to your balance sheet, if your assets don't equal your liabilities plus equity, you've done something wrong, so go back and check. Okay, so there's places you can check your work. When you're doing your journal entries, your debits should equal your credits. When you're doing your trial balance, your debits should equal your credits. And when you do your balance sheet, your total assets equal your total liabilities plus equity. 3 opportunities to check your work. All right, and now that we've concluded our financial statements, that will be the last thing we do in the journal entries to financial statements journey. The next video will focus on roll forwards and how you can determine information about some of your accounts.